Good morning. Here we are back in a Shiloh Sunday School class, taping another lesson today. Uh, this is going to be about the disciples that are on their way to Emmaus. Uh, they are they're going to be really surprised about some company that they're going to get, and we are in Luke chapter 24 now. We're working our way through. We have seen. Jesus has been crucified on the cross. He's been taken down and put in Joseph of Arimathea in his tomb for a little while. Now it's the third day. It has come back up. Jesus has been resurrected. Mary Magdalene, some of the other women have seen him in the garden place there, in the place where the tomb was. They have seen him. They have been commissioned, actually. I like to say sometimes with a Sunday school class that these were the first missionaries, that they came. They were the first, absolutely the first missionaries of the resurrected Jesus. They were the first ones to see him, and Jesus told them to go tell. You know, that's our mandate as Christians, is that we are to go tell. We're to go to tell what Jesus has done for us. You know, when we get saved, and hopefully we get in a good Bible believing church, we're not saved, as they say, to just sit and sour, but we're saved to serve, and that's what we should do. But when it comes to being a witness, we are to go and tell. And what are we going to tell? You know, I think what we are to tell is, what did Jesus do for us? You know, what I don't like to go into all that stuff about what I was like, or you know, things of that nature before I was saved, because that's not something I really want to talk about or go back and look at, except to say that God delivered me from a lot of things when I was saved, and He set me in a higher spot and a much, much better place. And so anyhow, these ladies, the Marys, there a bunch of Marys there that was involved in this thing, at that garden tomb there. Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James the Less, or James the Younger, not to be confused with the brother of James and John. That's a different one. Joseph, the father of his father was Alphaeus, and there was Mary and other women. Actually, you could make a case, if you wanted to stretch just a tiny little bit, you could make a case that one of the Marys that was there was actually the wife of Clopas, that we'll be talking about later on here in this lesson. It says, but it begins here, and I'm going to begin again different than what the lesson talks about, but I'm going to start in verse 13, because I think that is a very important part of the story here, and I don't think we need to miss out on it. And it says there in verse 13, chapter 24, verse 13 is where we're at. And behold, two of them went that same day to a village called Emmaus. Emmaus is another one of those unknown spots. Nobody really knows for sure where it's at. Tradition says that it was west-northwest of Jerusalem, about 7 to 7.5 miles. It says here in this verse, it says, that called Emmaus, which was from Jerusalem about 80 furlongs, which is about 7.5 miles. When you look at that, there's a couple of small villages there today that are kind of given that credit, but we don't know that for sure. So just bearing that in mind, and it's really irrelevant. It does not matter, except that the Scripture says it was about 7.5 miles from Jerusalem. At the end of the lesson, it might kind of matter a little bit, and we may mention that later on. But it says there, and they talked together of all these things which had happened. And this couple, it's basically accepted in most circles that this was two men talking as they were going to Emmaus. We may talk about that a little bit later too. And it says, and they talked together of all these things which had happened. And it came to pass that while they communed together and they reasoned and they were discussing back and forth the things that happened, and bearing in mind now, this was the same day of the resurrection, the first day of the week. For them, it would be what we call Sunday, and because their Sabbath was on a Saturday. And it says that it came to pass while they communed together and reasoned, Jesus himself drew near and went with them. But their eyes were holden that they should not know him. There's a couple of more times back over in the Bible, in the book of John, two places in the book of John where it talks about where people saw Jesus, but they did not recognize him for who it was. And one was Mary Magdalene in the garden there at the garden tomb. At first, she did not recognize him until he actually spoke to her and called her by name, and that veil was kind of lifted. Another place in John where it talks about after the resurrection, it says, talking about Peter, he said, well, I'm just going to go fishing. And that's what they did. Him and they all went out and went fishing. And I thought in that, and we might joke about it a little bit in class when this comes up, but I thought, how quick, after all they had been through, and after all they had saw, and all that stuff balanced out together, how quick they wanted to go back to their old way of life after being told time and time and time again that what had happened to Jesus was prophesied by him. They were told by him that all this was going to transpire and that he would rise on the third day, but yet they seemed to just forget that. And in fact, another place there, Jesus went down to the shore, and they didn't even know who he was. They was having a conversation with him, and that goes on, but that's another lesson for another time, except the thing that it was strange that they did not recognize him at that time, because he was still the same Jesus. And I think he looked a lot, he had been cleaned up, his body and all that, but it was a different time. But he said unto them, and again, talking about these two disciples that are leaving Jerusalem, they're going to Emmaus. They live there, by the way. We'll see that here in a little bit. He said, what manner of communication are these that you have one to another as you walk and are sad? And Jesus is the master teacher, always teaching, never stops teaching. And he is leading them. He's asking a question, but he's leading them into a conversation. Ultimately, that will be about him. And it says one of them, whose name was Cleopas, that E is silent in there, and it's pronounced Clopas. Answering said unto him, art thou only a stranger in Jerusalem, and hast not known the things which are come to pass there in these days? And bearing in mind, again, to know a little background, they are along towards the end of the Passover celebration, which lasted 8 days, and all these things have happened. Thousands and thousands of sheep have been killed for sacrifices, and Jesus himself has been arrested, and all that we've talked about in the past weeks, and they are amazed that this stranger that they don't know has not heard about all these things that are going on. But in their defense, Jerusalem was a very busy place at that time. And so they said, "Art thou only a stranger in Jerusalem, and hast not known these things which are come to pass there in these days?" And he says unto them, "What things?" And again, we have that leading. He's leading them further into this all the time. And they said unto him, "Concerning Jesus of Nazareth, which was a prophet, mighty in deed and word before God and all the people." In the history of this thing, it had been 400 years since the Jewish people had had a prophet. And now here's Jesus. He's came, and they recognize him for who he is. Excuse me. Back over in the beginning, where it talks about when Jesus was born, and Mary and Joseph took him to the temple to have him circumcised, actually, there was a man there named Simon, and he talked about that he could go ahead and die because he recognized Jesus, the baby, for who he was. And then there was a lady there, and her name was Anna, and the Bible calls her a prophetess, a lady prophet, and she talked about the consolation of Israel, or the freeing, the emancipation of Israel, that she had recognized Jesus for who he was there. And it goes on and it says, "And he said unto them, What things? And they said unto him, Concerning Jesus of Nazareth, which was a prophet, mighty in deed and word before God and all the people." The people recognized that Jesus was a prophet, but they did not recognize that he was the Messiah. And so those are very important things to them at that time and in their time. Excuse me again. And then he goes on. They go on and explain again, and how the chief priest and our rulers delivered him to be condemned to death and have crucified him. Now, it's easy to think that you see the chief priest, the high priest, Caiaphas and Annas, his father-in-law, the influence that they had over the Roman government at that time. But they were the ones that wanted Jesus crucified, not the Romans. But yet we see this thing that ultimately there's no lack of people to blame for what they did, because these chief priests, these religious people, ultra-religious people of the day, and our rulers, the Romans that ruled over them. Actually, when you go back in those original texts and you look at that word rulers there are the magistrates or the judges that set over them. But yet even calling it the Romans washed their hands of the deal, because they could not legally crucify another Roman. The Hebrews could not have anybody crucified on their own. They didn't have the power to do that because of Roman law. And so anyway, they said, delivered him to be condemned to death, and they have crucified him. But then the sad part really comes about this on their part, is that, but we trusted that it had been he which should have redeemed Israel. Those that Simon, those that Anna had talked about, that had been referred to. It said that it had been he which should have redeemed Israel, or freed us from this Roman oppression that we're under. And besides all this, today is the third day since these things were done. And yet they're still referring back to this thing about, what, don't you know about this? Haven't you heard about all this? But yet it's the third day that all this was done. And it says, yes, and certain women also of our company made us astonished. That word there is amazed, which were early at the sepulchre. And it's talking about when Mary Magdalene and these other ladies, Salome, several of them. There was a pretty good crowd of ladies went there that morning to anoint Jesus' body, actually. But it says, yea, and certain women also of our company were made us amazed, which were early at the sepulchre. They went and they found the empty tomb. Jesus had finally told them to go back and tell the others there that they were, evidently they had came to this, had found this place, and it's sometimes tradition says this upper room where they went and they gathered, actually hiding from the Romans because they didn't know what else was coming for them. But it says they had came back for there, and it says, when they found not his body, they came saying that he'd also seen a vision of angels which said that he was alive. And so, maybe the light's beginning to come on a little at a time. And it says, certain of them which were with us went to the sepulchre. And then in that, if you look back over in the book of Matthew, Mark, you see where this was Peter and John that came. When they came and told them what had happened, they thought maybe, and so they took off. And actually, John got to the tomb first, and Peter got there. He stuck his head in, and then he come out. And then when John came, he went on in and saw that it was empty, and saw that it. And it says, certain of them which were with us went to the sepulchre and found it even as the women had said, but him they saw not. And then Jesus begins to, in his gentle way, to chide them a little bit, to get on them just a little bit. And he said unto them, O fools, and slow of heart to believe all that the prophets had said. I was looking back in my Bible, and I found a chart back there that listed 70 messianic prophecies concerning Jesus that come. Did I say 70? 40. There was 40 of them back there that had prophesied of the Messiah coming. And these people, their education was in the Scriptures, reading the Scriptures. And so they'd been exposed to all this too. They were not ignorant, so to speak. In fact, Jesus said, "Oh fools," but when he said that, it was not the word in other places where it's used as moron. Here it's just used as unwise, that they were not wise in what they were heard, and slow of heart, that maybe they were a little bit too proud to accept what the Word said. We're kind of that way today. We kind of get like that, where we get a little bit huffy in what we think we know or maybe don't know, and we can get a little bit up in the air about that and ought not be. But it says, O fools and slow of heart to believe all that the prophets have spoken. And then he comes back with another statement there, and he's saying, and it's actually a question. And he's saying, ought not Christ to have suffered these things and to enter into his glory? It was prophesied so many times. And so shouldn't it be so? Shouldn't it have been like this? You don't want it. You didn't like it. But it is what it is. And you all should have expected it because it's been laid out in black and white. And again, back in Isaiah 53, it talks about that. In Psalms 22, it talks about the pain and the suffering of the Messiah and what he was going to have to go through. And so we see that, and he said, it ought not this have been like the Scripture says? If I can't trust the book, then I see this book, and I pretty much trust it. It's what we use for Sunday school, but I don't swallow that hook, line, and sinker. This part over here is what this is my bottom line. It's the final authority on what I believe, as the Scriptures say. Because once in a while, I'll find something in here that's just not I just disagree with it, and I can't line it up with what the Scripture says. In fact, here where it says understanding the context, it says Jesus' appearance on the road to Emmaus is the first of 3 resurrection appearances in Luke, and I have to disagree with that. Actually, it's the 4th when you go to looking, but these were men that wrote this, and I give them that much slack on that. I'm not saying I'm any smarter than them. I'm just saying that according to Scripture, this is the 4th time that Jesus actually appeared to his disciples after that. And I'm not going to go through all that because it's unnecessary. But he said, and then he says, ought not Christ to have suffered these things and to enter into his glory? And beginning at Moses and all the prophets, he expounded unto them and all the Scriptures the things concerning himself. And there we go back there again to those 40 things, which there was way more than that. That was just 40 messianic prophecies in the Bible. And it says, and they drew near unto, I'm going to run out of time here, under the village, or they was getting close to Emmaus. And it says where they went, and he made as though he would have gone further, like he was going to go on. Remember now, it's getting late in the day. Probably not dark yet by any means, but it's getting late in the day. It might be 4 or 5 o'clock by our time on this. I don't know what they figure a person walks, if under a normal walk, how long it would take you to walk for 7 miles, but probably a couple of hours at least, 2.5 hours. And it says, but they constrained him, saying, abide with us, for it is toward evening, and the day is far spent. And he went in to tarry with them. He went into their home. You know, that is a thing. That's one reason why I think that maybe this was Mary, his wife, or man and wife, rather than 2 men. Take that wherever you want to take it to, but I believe that. And it goes down there in verse 32 again. It says, and they said one to another, did our heart, and it says our heart, one heart, burn within us while he talked with us by the way. But then to back up with that, that's just what I believe. That's another one of the things I can't prove. It just most people believe that that these were 2 men that were walking down that way. But I think there's a very good scriptural reference here to allow for this to have been Clopas and his wife for this couple here. It's not something we're going to argue about or break bread over or have a falling out over. And it says, and it came to pass as he stood at meat with them, he took bread and blessed it and brake and gave it to them, and their eyes were opened. It was just kind of like when Jesus turned to or was looking at Mary, and he called her by name, and she just knew who it was then. And she fell at his feet, and he said, don't touch me, for I'm not yet ascended. But he said, he took bread and blessed it and brake and gave it to them. And when he did those things, the light came on, basically, is what it amounts to. The light had came on, and they said one to another, did our heart not burn within us while he talked with us by the way, and while he opened to us the Scriptures? And it says, and they rose up that same hour and returned to Jerusalem, and found the 11 gathered together, and them that were with them, saying, the Lord is risen indeed, and hath appeared to Simon. And so we have another group coming into that. So anyway, that's the lesson for today. We are through with that. We're going to go on with that. You might want to be in prayer for us, because next quarter we're going to be in Ecclesiastes and the book of Job, and that's going to get interesting. But you all have a good day. Thanks again for your views on these things, and your comments, and we appreciate you. Have a good day.